disorder. Excuse me. Society just does not understand this disorder at all. Excuse me for saying it that way. I'm a little flinchy with my words right now.
It's you and
Before we get into this video, I have to say I have a very serious question for you guys at the end of this video, so stick around to the end. Thank you. I acknowledge that some of my videos that I've done last were not very good because I've been making them in my garage, and I've been making them, of course, with my camera that's kind of like a GoPro, mainly because I've been in my studio, which, like I said, is in my garage, and like I said, my camera's not very good, and I need a shotgun microphone. I really need a DSLR, and, well, of course, the DSLR would be good, but unfortunately, I don't have those devices, and my money's a little bit short. Even though, of course, I do have the expenses for a nice camera and some other audio equipment. Although I wish I could connect the audio equipment with that camera there, but that camera's a piece of shit. So it's the whole story and the whole shebang. But I will say this, yes, of course, can be edgy at times, and I know some people will say, yeah, that's a little bit, whatever. But here's the point. The reason why I'm edgy is because my personality is there to, of course, get conservatives to, of course, rage tweet what I'm saying to do my activism, so that way they are, in a way, doing my activism. Excuse the timer. Excuse me for having that. They, in a way, are doing my activism for me, in a sense, instead of just me doing it. So they are kind of promoting my videos, is what I want them to do, by rage tweeting my videos and by complaining about my videos, by basically having me, be the most, how should I say, a little bit edgy and a little bit, using psychodrama to get them to do so at it. I know some people could say, excuse me, that it could be a little bit offensive on their side, and I don't mean to be offensive on their side. I myself have schizophrenia, and yes, it can be a little bit taxing at times. And I don't want people to think wrong of me, so please don't. Please be civil. But today we're looking at schizophrenia and ableism, if I can say it that way. So, I live in the South and in Louisiana, and I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder combined. And this is very problematic because the state doesn't protect people with schizophrenia at all. Except for in the case where you get a handicap placard for a car when you get a driver's license, which is a little different scenario there because people can still be ableistic even in that situation. But that's another story for another day. One of the biggest problems with dealing with schizophrenia isn't just the voices that you hear in your head or the visual hallucinations, but the state not protecting people with schizophrenia, as I stated, or other mental illnesses. It's dealing with the ableism that comes with the disorder, mainly, like I said before, in the form of either the state not protecting you or in the form of society being ableistic in whatever ways. And I don't mean to be seen as a woke skull because I'm not, but society very much is very ableistic against people with schizophrenia, and it's disgusting that people are this way. It's disgusting that I can't be open about my disability in public without somebody shaming me or without somebody having to call 911 and of course, me not being protected by the law, not being able to refuse service, which happens all the fucking time, or can happen all the fucking time, even though I rarely see it happen because I rarely discuss this out in the public on my own terms, because I rarely can, in a way. The severity of this ableism is vast and wide, and is exactly what I'm going to explain here today, as we are going to be talking about ableism as it relates to schizophrenia. The deal is, ableism with schizophrenia happens on multiple different levels, including all the way up to the societal level and up to the state and local levels, is what I'm saying. State law basically is one of the causes for why it happens on the local level as well. It enables things on the local level, and that's a big problem. And the problem is that, as I said, the state law and state attitudes as well as stigmas have been around for years, if not decades, and have been the cause, as I said, of why this ableism even exists in the first place, and is the reason why the ableism needs to go away, as it is unnecessary and is damaging to other people. It needs to stop, but society doesn't stop it at all. Society doesn't understand the disorder. Excuse me. Society just does not understand this disorder at all. Incarceration of schizophrenics. According to Nomni, nearly 15% of men and 30% of women booked into jails have serious mental health conditions. So, to the statistics, people with schizophrenia are more likely to be thrown in jail. And if you want to know why, the reason is pretty clear. All we have to do is look at, 1, the side effects, 2, the state laws are based on the side effects, which they should not be. They should be based on the Constitution, and they're not. And this is a very big problem. Like, why are the fucking laws based on the side effects of a disability instead of being based on the Constitution? That is something I don't understand. See, here's the issue. Schizophrenia has delusions, which are fixed false beliefs. Severe delusions. It can have severe delusions, and it can have severe hallucinations. It has hallucinations. And the thing is that when you have schizophrenia, you're going to hallucinate. Period. The thing is that people don't understand this situation, that no matter what happens, even if you're taking medications, you're gonna have some level of hallucinations, okay? So the medications only cover so much of the hallucinations. So people always have this fixed idea that medications will correct. They will correct the hallucinations and they will fix the situation. Now, yes, of course, the delusions can be fixed, but they have to be fixed in therapy, and they have to be done in a therapeutic session. Hallucinations, on the other hand, cannot fully be corrected. And in some cases, the thing is that you can control hallucinations through your environment and through different other aspects. But the thing is that hallucinations aren't always what people think they are. And like, only a small percentage of the medications, only a small percentage, I meant to say, of the hallucinations, the medications actually allows control over. So they don't control all of the hallucinations, and they can't control all of the hallucinations. The hallucinations are going to be with you for the rest of your life, period. And you're there's a reason why they call it coping, is because you will have to cope with those hallucinations once you have schizophrenia for the rest of your life. So things like hearing voices, seeing things, those things happen all the time with some people who have schizophrenia. And the thing is that you just got to deal with them. And you can't stop that from happening. That's the problem. And society always thinks that you can just automatically correct it, and you can't. That's the reason why we don't have lobotomies anymore, or we don't have these corrective surgeries anymore, because there is no way to do this. And even if we had technology that could somewhat do this, it would still not be enough. Okay? It would still not be able to correct the hallucinations that we're talking about. So that is the problem that we're facing, because it may be more than just a genetic feature. So that is the problem with hallucinations, and you can't correct that shit. So, and people think you can, and states and society always thinks that you can. Like my mom earlier today, she saw this essay, and she was like, saying, do you hear voices? Do you know, and all this shit, and then thinking that, the voices can just go away. Well, that's not true. They can't. I still talk to stuff that, in a way, I know it's myself. I know it is directly myself, but it's almost like you're talking to something that's not there, but you know it's yourself. You see what I'm saying? So the thing is, that is part of the schizophrenia. That's part of the hallucinogenic element, and you cannot get rid of that. But you're identifying it as, I'm identifying it as part of myself, but I can't get rid of it. You see what I'm saying? There's just no way that I can get rid of that. My doctors already know this, but my mom doesn't know this. And that's a problem on her part. It's just a pain. These extreme symptoms lead to lack of understanding, you see. And that's the other problem. And that's where society thinks they can just enact certain laws. Because sometimes people with schizophrenia, a lot of times when police pull us over in a cop car, they think that they can enact the same specific laws that apply to somebody who has who's fully able, and say that, well, the person knew what he was doing, but in most cases they didn't, because they weren't in the right sense of reality. They didn't know what they were doing half of the time. And in most cases with schizophrenia, you don't know if you're in reality or not reality. You don't know what reality you're in. And in most cases, you don't know any of those things. And sometimes, depending upon the state of psychosis that you're in. So it's I know the sense of reality in which we judge today on is subjected to society. But the thing is that when you're not basing on today's societal, when you're not in the sense of what society bases reality on, then you're in your own sense of reality, then the problems start kicking in, because the police department thinks you're in the same reality as them, and the state thinks you're in the same reality as them, but you're not. You're in a totally different reality usually when you have schizophrenia. And that is the problem that most of the states do not understand, and that's the problem that society doesn't understand. And that's where the 13th Amendment violations kick in, because they will arrest you and they will put you in jail just because you have schizophrenia, and they do not understand this whole scenario. And that's the other area where, of course, the handicap placard could come into play, because a handicap placard could mean that, especially if they pull you over, it could be the difference between you going to jail and you going to the hospital, or you getting treatment for something, especially if you're not in the right sense of reality. So that could be a big deal. But when these police officers pull you over, it's that when they pull people with schizophrenia over, they think that everybody they pull over is fully able-bodied and is fully able to respond to them and is fully able to do this and that, blah, 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 whole fucking 9 yards. And with people with schizophrenia, that's not the case. And when you're dealing with somebody with schizophrenia, whenever you do that, it is a 13th Amendment violation, period. That is the end situation. And when you start talking about this whole scenario of when you start talking about that, the rest of the scenario, what they're going to explain later, excuse me, the thing is that people who go to jail tend to have all of their things like their medical stuff taken away from them, tend to have their support cut out from underneath them, and tend to be in a position where the only support they can get is by going back to jail. So now it's almost like a 14th Amendment violation is being done, because they're not getting the medical support they need, because now they can't get access to Medicare or Medicaid, period. So those are huge problems, and they need to be addressed, but they're not. While I can say, as I said before, medications can help with life, they do not stop hallucinations. I still hallucinate, and there's nothing I can do about it. As I said before, it's just a thing, and it just happens. Some of the fear and the ignorance that society has towards the hallucinations and towards the disability itself, and the laws that society has set forth, is enabling the unconstitutional ableism within society that I said that violates even UN Declaration of Human Rights. The UN Declaration of Human Rights, I meant to say. Wow, why do I even say things incorrectly sometimes? The point is that most southern states, including the state of Louisiana, do not really protect people with this disorder at all. They openly and blatantly violate the 13th Amendment consistently, as I said. And these things do not get better when they're in jail, as I said. According to the Alliance for Mental Illness, they stay in jail longer than their counterparts without mental illness. They are at risk of victimization, and often their mental health conditions get worse. Why? After leaving jail, many no longer have access to needed healthcare and benefits. A criminal record often makes it hard for individuals to get a job or housing. Many individuals, especially without access to mental health services and support, wind up in homeless in emergency rooms and often rearrested. At least 83% of jail inmates with a mental illness did not have access to needed treatment. In 2005, Louisiana had over 51,458 people that were convicted that had serious mental illness. This is a serious violation to the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Why is no one taking this serious? My guess is that it has to be because of the side effects of this disorder with schizophrenia and other disorders like it. Mainly because of those of us suffering from schizophrenia, including me, don't always end up being in this right mindset when the police show up and are either trying to give us a traffic ticket or trying to give us tickets for other violations. In most of these cases, some of us don't have the ability to actually understand the difference between what is law and what isn't law due to the state of psychosis that we may be in or may not be in, depending upon what is happening at the time. And this is where the 13th Amendment violations come into play by the Republican states, because they believe that we should just be locked up and thrown away for not responding to a police officer when we may not be capable of doing so because of the state of psychosis that we may be in at the time. This is the problem that these Republican states have, because people with disabilities need support, not prison sentences. And Republican states are just the worst of it all, because they're going by, as I said, they're going by the side effects of the disorder, not by the constitutional law, which is the problem. You should not be going by the side effects of the disorder. You should be going by what is considered constitutional law. 14th Amendment violations and ableism within society. What is just as bad is that there are violations to the 14th Amendment as well. The process is the right to refuse service. The problem is that most states acknowledge that people with schizophrenia may not be in the right state of reality. However, red states in the Deep South do not protect the rights to refuse service and are willing to pass laws that state that people with this disability do not have the right to refuse service. The worst problem with this is that this causes systematic problems within society itself. Mainly the point where everyone who owns a business in the South does not have to worry about the 14th Amendment violations when it comes to the EEOC violations in Title VII. Here are the point, they could fire somebody with schizophrenia without having to worry about Title VII at all. I've had that done to me myself. And also, there's a deal where if you're open about your schizophrenia, anyone can actually remote diagnose you, and if they call the police, you don't have a right to refuse service from the police department. It is noted, of course, that these states violate Section 1 of the 14th Amendment mainly because they believe anyone with this sort of disorder should be in treatment or in jail. In most cases, not actually be able to function in society, hence why the EEOC violations actually exist. See what I mean? But in my case, I don't think these states even actually care for due process neither, as many of these states are willing to violate the 13th Amendment for these particular people who have schizophrenia. I also know that these violations of the 14th Amendment are particular violations that lead to and enable ableistic behaviors within society. I should also note that the police department could send you to any hospital for any reason, and the thing is that one hospital provider may not even believe that you are getting care from another hospital, therefore leading to mismanagement or mistreatment. And because of this is a mental institution, it also leads to false imprisonment because it is a mental institution, so to speak, and mental institutions can be seen almost like a prison except you still get certain rights afterwards. The issue is that states in the South do not understand that no matter if you have a mental diagnosis, they are not required to automatically pick you up and send you to the hospital just because you have schizophrenia. You need to be voluntarily doing it yourself. There needs to be a court order, or there needs to be a power of attorney. In some cases, the South does none of these. And this is where the stereotypical issue comes in. They should not be making anyone go to the hospital without a court order, period. Or without power of attorney, period. Well, they don't have power of attorney because that has to be given to the family. So, you get the point. Now, let's get into the stereotypical issues by society. These stereotypical issues come up in unethical psychiatric behaviors that is performed by society. One of these includes remote diagnosis from someone who is not a licensed psychiatrist. You can very easily be sent to jail or sent to a hospital because some 80-year-old fuck at a Walmart had gotten scared and disrespectful and remote diagnosed you and called the cops. See, that's my problem, is people who don't know that they can't remote diagnose you, period. And I'm gonna get into this in just a second. They can't remote diagnose you can't remote diagnose people, period. It's just something you shouldn't be doing, period. I know some people are gonna kill me for this because it involves Barry Goldwater. But in the 1964 elections, 12,356 psychiatrists were given the chance to make a psychiatric diagnosis of the actual presidential candidates of the 1964 presidential race. Anyone care to guess what psychiatrists actually did at the time? Yeah, that's right. They were remote diagnosing people. This led to the creation of the Goldwater Rule in 1973 because some psychiatrists were claiming that Barry Goldwater was suffering from chronic psychosis to even schizophrenia at the point without him actually going to a clinical psychiatrist's office and being clinically examined by a psychiatrist to even have this diagnosis in a clinically approved location or hospital. So basically, he was not in the appropriate settings to be given the diagnosis, and they were not doing the appropriate things and given the diagnosis. So the diagnosis doesn't count. You see what I'm saying? I know you guys probably hate me now because I mentioned Barry Goldwater, and he was a very big racist and so forth and blah 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 blah. But it is very important to note that you should not be diagnosing people on the street if you're not clinically licensed, or diagnosing anybody without being in a clinically approved location, regardless of the fact that you are licensed or not. And the idea is that if you aren't licensed, you should know that people who are licensed can't make a clinical diagnosis at a Walmart or on YouTube. So if a psychiatrist can't make a clinical diagnosis on YouTube or at Walmart, then should you be making a clinical diagnosis on YouTube or at Walmart? Excuse my dogs. It's actually very offensive to disabled people to go out and to diagnose disabled people or other people, either with or without a disability, on the street if you're not a clinically approved clinician, regardless if you're in a clinically approved location or not. So that's something you should know, period. The Goldwater Rule is Section 7 in the American Psychiatric Association's Principle of Medical Ethics, which states that it is unethical for psychiatrists to give a professional opinion about public figures whom they have not examined in person and for whom they have not obtained consent or discussed mental health in public statements. And if you understand the idea of what is ethical in the medical field, you understand that clinicians can lose their license for not following the Goldwater Rule, even though it was made by the American Psychiatric Association, and even though it uses Barry Goldwater's name. Yes, excuse me for doing, yeah, just do that. But yes, of course, okay? You cannot, as a clinician, discuss someone's medical stuff out in public, period, without their consent. And you cannot medically diagnose anyone in the public, period, that you have not met, period. It's part of medical ethics. So as I stated before, and I will state throughout this video, if it is unethical for somebody to make a diagnosis, for a clinician to make a diagnosis on YouTube, then it's unethical for anybody to make a diagnosis on YouTube. You see what I'm saying? See, the deal with remote diagnosing is that it can lead to psychiatrists actually, as I said before, losing their license for remote diagnosing people, as it violates the Goldwater Rule. If you are 80 years old and a person who is dialing 911 just because a schizophrenic person is walking around, look at the point. As I said before, look at the point. A psychiatrist could lose their license for doing what you did. If a psychiatrist could lose their license for doing what you did, should you be doing what you did? I don't give a fuck if you're scared. Don't do it. The deal is, I don't care how old you are. If you don't know the criteria of the diagnosis, and you're not a clinician, and you're not working with an approved psychiatric facility, then it is offensive for you to diagnose anyone with a mental condition, and it is unethical, and it doesn't matter how old you are or how scared you are of the other person, period. And you shouldn't be scared of them in the first place. Why are you scared of them? I should also note that the edgelords throughout the decades go around claiming that the transgender people are schizophrenics too. They should acknowledge the same thing, that if you're not a clinician, you cannot make the diagnosis without being in a clinical field, and you cannot make the diagnosis on YouTube, and you cannot make the diagnosis at all if you're not a clinician or a psychiatrist, period, so to speak. So don't make it. I'm going through my mind about this. It's just going through my mind about it. And that is the other area that I want to touch on. The edgelords consistently go about doing this shit. Look at this.
I don't think I'm allowed to say this, and it will probably get flagged or removed because for some unknown reason, whenever we talk about gender identity disorder, we're not allowed to link it to other mental illnesses. If you do that, you're demonized, ostracized, and ridiculed. The media tries its best to disassociate these things, even though it's clear that a person who demands that they are clearly something they're not is exhibiting the same symptoms as the ones you'd see in some other major mental illnesses. Let me give an example. If I walked around saying that I see myself as something I'm not, it would be a cognitive deficit. And these deficits are major symptoms found in schizophrenia.
I'm not gonna put the channel that made this video out there, but I am going to say this. Anyone who is using schizophrenia for either ableism or transphobia should note that this is an immediate termination from YouTube or any social media platform, as it is not just a TOS violation. Once they catch you doing this kind of behavior, they terminate you, okay? They terminate you immediately. And as I said before, you're not a clinical psychiatrist, and you cannot make clinical decisions on YouTube, as clinical psychiatrists can actually be fired for making, clinical decisions on YouTube about other people on YouTube. So note that. But getting back to the work situation, the issue is that we are kind of forced, because of the way the state treats us, schizophrenics, as far as work goes, to the point where we have to work gig jobs, as that is pretty much the only thing that the state law allows us to do within the confines of our disorder. Because if we were to apply for other jobs, we would have to lie about the schizophrenia, mainly because they would most likely not hire us. You see, because in their situation is the state doesn't protect us from the EEOC, doesn't protect us through EEOC stuff, you see? And even then, we're at higher risk for going to jail for stupid ass reasons. Hell, I have a higher risk of going to jail because of a cop pulling me over to get a ticket because of my schizophrenia, more or less than an able-bodied person does because of a cop pulling them over to get a ticket due to their fully being able. I don't understand that. But this all draws back to those 13th and 14th Amendment violations that these red states like Louisiana will not address. And one last thing, I live in Louisiana. Like I said, I live in New Orleans, which gets affected by hurricanes every 3 to 5 years. So this gets amplified if I have to evacuate to Houston or something like that, and I have a medical emergency, because God knows that the medical providers in the next state over will actually listen to my primary medical providers, seeing the fact that I have schizophrenia and I'm coming from New Orleans. The chances are that that hospital may not even believe that I even have medical providers because I have schizophrenia. So you can kind of see the discrimination that happens here with people with schizophrenia. It's pretty bad. In fact, it's very bad. It's to the point where not only do our medical providers have to trust us in who we are, but we have to trust them in who they are. And that is one of the hardest things to do, considering the fact that we can't even trust society. See, when there are people diagnosing us on the streets for no apparent reason, who are not even clinical physicians in the field of psychiatry, and half of them are doing it out of fear and the other half are doing it because they don't know what funny is, and they think that it means it's okay to attack somebody else for racist reasons, like Steven Crowder, who makes racist impressions of Asian people.
You compare black people to a monkey eating a banana?
Not to mention that the video that I just showed is Steven Crowder trying to make fun of somebody who has ASD and is Asian, as you can see how racist and ableist Steven Crowder is. And these red states are allowing us to be sent to medical providers who don't even know who we are, or they're sending us to jail. Then you have to ask this question: why hasn't something been done about this? And why hasn't this been ruled unconstitutional? And for what reason has this been allowed to even exist if we have such things as the 13th and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution? And if the Republicans in different states are just willy-nilly throwing the Constitution under the sun, then what? Put every minority group in chains and shackles like we did to the African American community back in the 19th century? Come on, man. The problem is quite clear. Some mental hospitals are like prisons for some people because they have to be for security reasons. And if people aren't going there voluntarily and the state is making them go there without warrant, or they're making them go there without the family having power of attorney, then what is better than this, other than legal slavery for people with mental disabilities? Same thing goes for incarceration of people with mental disabilities. So my question to you, comrades, is what can we do to stop this systematic ableism that is going on all levels of society? Comrades, leave your comments and answers down below in the comment section. Subscribe, click the bell icon for notifications and all that jazz. And remember, if you want to support me, you can follow me on Twitter, Patreon, Streamlabs, etc., Facebook. All the links are in the description below. Thank you, and bye.